Welcome to Beyond the Suit, the podcast that aims to push the current boundaries and conventional thoughts of those working in the legal industry and look beyond the suit, brought to you by Fintelligent. I'm your host, Zac Green, and across the podcast, I'll be speaking to legal professionals from all levels and backgrounds, opening a new door for insight into the legal world. You can expect conversations from inspirational people that aim to advise and offer insight on the lighter side of the industry, from pointers on progression and words of wisdom to funny stories that break the stereotype. Let's look beyond the suit. Welcome everyone. I'd like to wish you a very, very warm welcome to another episode of our podcast Beyond the Suit, powered by Fintelligent. This podcast looks beyond the suit of a lawyer and we find out interesting stories and good facts about the people that we have on. Today, I've got an exceptional guest with me, a very, very interesting man. He is the European head of leverage finance, done over 200 deals. Mr. Stuart Brinkworth, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not bad at all. I have to say, it's got to be the perfect day for a podcast, even though we're inside.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully this is the start of the summer.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, how do you feel sort of in general as the sun gets, brighter? Is that, affect your work? Are you working from home more or?
No, probably 1 or 2 days a week. I think it's a nicer walk to the station in the morning when the sun's out. There's no doubt about that. And I think it's nice to be sort of coming into the office in the morning and going home in the evening while the sun's still out. So I think it just gives you a bit more energy and it's less depressing than walking home in the cold and the dark as often we do during the wintertime.
No, definitely. I think it might drastically change your chance of probably going out for lunch and after work and out for dinner if you kind of, you notice that a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, the city's been getting busier, I think, in that regard, particularly on a Thursday evening, which I think is now the new Friday and has been for a while. And obviously down by the river as well. It's great to be out. So, but I quite like getting home, seeing my dog, seeing my wife, spending a bit of time in the garden if the sun's still out. So, but yeah, everyone does their own thing, I guess.
What dog have you got?
A West Highland Terrier called Snowy.
Handful.
He's great fun. He's fantastic, a real character.
See, I get guilty when I leave my dog. When I have to go into work and I have to leave my dog all alone. If we had to like bring your dog to work day, I think that's something we need to start introducing.
It's certainly been talked about, and I think 1 or 2 law firms have experimented with it. I think it'd probably end up being chaos in the office, I suspect. Although I'm sure the dogs would enjoy the day out and the experience, but not so sure it would be conducive to working. I
know. Well, I've made the mistake of wearing black. Obviously, my dog sheds, so I've had to clean myself up. But I really appreciate you obviously coming on. I think it'd be great to obviously understand a bit about your role in more detail as it is to what you do and your title at Mayer Brown.
Yeah, so I think my role is very much a sort of business development, practice, leadership type role, in the sense of giving the clients the benefit of many years now of experience as it has been, qualified in 2000, so 23 years now and still going, and really trying to provide some direction to the practice, not just in London, but where relevant in Europe as well.
The scale of law, the landscape has changed quite frequently. How's you found the market post-COVID?
How have I found the market? I would say that the economy's changed, right? So I think that's the biggest issue. The market is really a reflection of the economic reality that we're in at any particular time, and certainly the sort of post-COVID world is very, very different to where we were pre-COVID. Not just from an inflationary perspective, but I think the cost of interest rates and all of these things are kind of coming together, obviously war in Europe, to make a very challenging and sort of volatile economic environment, which is having a real impact on businesses who, some have adjusted well, others are really struggling to adjust, and others are still trying to work out, what the new normal is. And that's providing a lot of challenges for businesses. But, we're obviously trying to help businesses where we can adjust to that and deal with the issues that they now face. So I think we're in a very different world. That's no doubt. But when I think back over 23 years, went through the financial crisis. I remember when Lehman happened, and I thought actually the phone had been unplugged because it just stopped ringing. There was just nothing going on. So, and obviously then through COVID, you kind of every time something happens, you think, well, that's it. I'm done now. I've seen all the volatility in my career, and then something else comes up and happens. So I think the longer you're in the legal profession, the more you see over time. But hopefully, the more experience you have to draw upon to see you through some of those tough times.
I mean, you've had so many challenges in your legal career, but, starting at the beginning, you've had quite an unconventional path into the legal sector. So detail us your journey sort of into law, kind of how you transitioned into it and what you were doing before.
Very unusual transition into law. I mean, I grew up in Chippenham in Wiltshire in the West Country. Had a very strong West Country accent, which I've managed over the years to almost completely get rid of, not quite.
Shaking it off.
And in my town, in my family, people never went really to university. I was the first person in my family to go to university when I ended up going. But really, from the age of 14 to 16, I was just dreaming of being a professional footballer, and that's all I wanted to do. I really thought that's what I was going to do. And I think as time kind of went on, and I was playing semi-professional from the age of 16 for Chippenham Town, and then some other clubs in that area. It really became clear to me that I probably wasn't going to make it. Succession of injuries, too small, only had a right foot, various other things. And so I really started in my early 20s to think about what I was going to do with my life at that point. And I was actually working for Kennet District Council, who are based in Devizes in Wiltshire. I was an environmental health technician, which is basically somebody who deals with environmental health but hasn't got the sort of environmental health degree. And I was involved with the council's lawyer in particular doing some prosecutions for businesses who breached various regulations. And I started to become interested in, I guess, the legal side. And I was sort of thinking of going to university, but I wanted to have something that led into a sort of professional career. I could have gone and studied sport, but what would I have done with that afterwards? So, and obviously, when you go as an older student, you're giving up a lot to go, because at that point I owned a house and drove a nice car, and so I was going to be giving all that up to kind of go and do something. So I wanted my degree or whatever I chose to be something that led somewhere. And so really it was this person, Kevin Winter, his name was, who persuaded me to go and do a law degree. And because I didn't have A-levels, I dropped out of school during A-levels. I was really applying as a mature student to various universities. And Lancaster University accepted me based on my environmental health qualifications and the fact that I was a mature student. Which was quite brave of them. I wasn't obviously somebody who come through the traditional sort of O-level or GCSE as they were then, A-level route. And so I went to university in 1994. At the age of 25, and university was a great experience for me because being somebody who'd worked before, just being organised at university is half the battle, particularly when doing something like law, which involves a lot of self-study. I played a huge amount of sport while I was there, which was great. So I captained the football team and played cricket as well. But also I was able to really excel at studies because I was so committed going, having given up so much to go there, that I found myself rising to the top of the class very quickly. And that helped me in terms of job applications. I ended up doing a vacation placement with Wild Sapt, as they were called in those days, now Denton's, over Easter. In my second year, I was then invited by them to go to New York in the summer and have a placement at their New York office, which was obviously incredible. And believe it or not, that was the first time in my life I'd gone on a plane.
Wow.
And I remember the night before feeling incredibly nervous, thinking I've got this sort of 8-hour flight to New York. I'd never been on a plane before. What's it going to be like? And you wouldn't even think about it now, at then the age of 26, getting on a plane for the first time. I mean, my children, who are now 14 and coming up to 16, have probably been on a plane 20 times, 30 times, whatever it is. We live in such a different world now to how we did then. So it was strange to think back that was the first time I'd been on a flight. And obviously landing in New York, I'd never, I'd been to, France and Switzerland, once, and that was it. Before suddenly I was in this different part of the world in New York, this huge city. And I remember sitting outside the hostel that I was staying in at the time and just looking out and thinking, God, this is different. And then, my exam results came through while I was there. I'd got first in all my exams in the second year, so obviously made applying for training contracts a lot easier. And I ended up accepting a training contract from Allen & Overy, who were very interested in my background, and obviously my results had spoke for themselves. And and it was an incredible experience being a trainee. And I went back to New York in what was effectively my first seat at A&O, and I took the bar exam, New York bar exam, while I was there, which again was a good challenge to take on and pass. So I actually qualified in New York before I qualified in the UK, and I qualified in England a year later in 2000. And I really wanted to, I think because I was a bit older and probably a bit more impatient than people who'd come through a straight A-level route, I decided to leave Allen & Overy and go to Latham & Watkins on qualification. And I spent 2 years there. And that didn't quite work out how I envisaged for many reasons. And I sort of ended up going back into, I guess, what you'd call a slightly more traditional UK stroke international law firm environment at Ashurst. And my career kind of continued from there. So, but I think when I look back now, I think one of the great things about Allen & Overy at that time is my intake of trainees had a huge amount of diversity in it, including there was one chap whose name I can't recall, who was probably in his sort of mid-50s, was actually a retired senior police officer. And I thought that was amazing that Allen & Overy had sort of taken somebody on as a trainee, because clearly that guy was never going to work for 20, 30 years. But they still gave that person an opportunity to train and qualify, and that sort of really sort of made me feel that law, whilst I personally think is still quite elitist and still stuck in a lot of traditional ways, although improving, I could still see little sheds of light that there were opportunities for people who didn't fit that particular mold, and that's been something that I've always felt quite passionate about during my career, is to try and encourage others, to go into law if they feel it's something they want to do, and not be put off by some of the, the reputations that law has and some of the behaviours. And during my career, I've seen all sorts of horrible things that made me think, this is not a straightforward profession for those of us who didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge and go through a traditional route. But I think you just have to keep fighting and keep working, and eventually, if you're good, I think you'll rise to the top, regardless of those challenges.
You mentioned your kind of thoughts and feelings towards law as it is now as a sector, but growing up, what was your attitude towards the legal industry?
I think, I grew up in a working class family in a small town, so I never for a moment ever thought I'd become a lawyer. And actually neither did anyone else, even when I was actually about to go to university. I remember people in my hometown saying, why are you doing that? You're not going to get a job at the end of it. And so I think there was a real negativity about people like me getting into the legal profession. It was something reserved for the middle classes, for those who went to only the top universities. And so I'm glad I sort of had that self-belief to put all that to one side and say, no, I'm going to give this a go. And clearly my path has been, I've been very lucky, very fortunate in terms of the path that I've created for myself. And but I hope it encourages others from similar backgrounds and in similar circumstances to have that self-confidence to, back themselves, because I do think law needs more people. I think law's made great strides in gender diversity and race diversity, but I think in social diversity, law still has a long way to go. And I think social diversity does tend to get pushed to the background a little bit, much to the detriment, I think, of a lot of good people. And I've seen at Mayor Brown, for instance, we have solicitor apprentices now at Mayor Brown, and these are all people who have not come through a traditional route as I didn't. And I've worked with some of these people and they're fantastic. And I think there's a real richness of experience, life experience and skills that these people bring that I think in the main, somebody who comes straight from school through university doesn't necessarily have. And I think that adds definitely to the legal profession and to law firms.
I mean, a change in industry is going to be tough and a bit daunting for anyone. I can only imagine sort of, what you were going through at the time, as well as, other people. You mentioned the retired police sergeant, but what sort of key skills did you pick up in local government that you found easy to put and apply into the legal space?
Well, I think if I look at my job then, which is very much going out on my own, driving around, towns in the countryside, inspecting pubs, restaurants, hotels, dealing face to face with business owners, explaining to them, where they were going wrong in terms of complying with health and safety or food safety legislation, and really helping them, I guess, get to a point where they comply. There's the people skills side is definitely something that you develop, obviously, doing that, and being able to deal with people in stressful situations, where particularly where you're in a position where you're, have a certain amount of power, I guess, in terms of them, and being able to use that in the right way and in a constructive way to reach an outcome. And I don't think you can really teach that. And I think when I look at younger lawyers now, some incredibly fantastically bright people, much more enabled on technology than I will ever be. But I think, one of the key skills in law, particularly I think in the city, is that people skill and being able to deal with clients, deal with lawyers on the other side. And I think that's where people can really make or break a career, is being successful at that.
I mean, you seem to have a great journey, obviously, coming into the legal career, and then you were at Lancaster University, which you are now an ambassador at that university. So talk to me a bit about that role and sort of that importance it has, still to this day in your career.
Well, I think clearly I'm always grateful for Lancaster that, in terms of the way they taught their degree was very a critical law theory. So it wasn't just teaching, law as it was. It was about thinking about law from different perspectives. I took philosophy as a minor, as part of my degree. Ended up writing some interesting dissertations on a Marxist critique of property law and a Kantian approach to the law of defamation, which I still have the essays at home, or the papers that I wrote. And so I think it sort of taught me to think outside the box. And again, I think that's quite an important skill to carry through into your legal profession. Clients are interested in not so much the law, but what the solution is. And I think that's what you've really got to focus on as a lawyer is always find the solution, because anyone can present a problem, but actually fewer people can present the solution. So, and I think being an ambassador for university, it's all about, because it's in the north of England, and it's about making people realise that even though you go to Lancaster, you can still come to the city and make it in the city. And I think that, to me, is the important thing, is people having aspirations beyond, working locally in that region when they graduate, but all about actually you can do anything in your career if you want to.
I mean, traditionally, people are kind of introduced to law at the sixth form, maybe even university level courses start, being applicable for people to take. But do you think, the current state of education, do you think law should maybe be introduced at an earlier level of education?
Well, I think if you're my kids, it probably has been, I guess. But, I don't think so, actually. I think, in a way, there's almost too much focus on, the sort of black letter law. And I think one of the issues that law firms have faced over the years is with trainees and newly qualified lawyers is all these people are fantastic at black letter law, but it's actually the skills that is really what people need to progress and to transition from being a student and a trainee to actually being a lawyer, giving advice to clients day to day. And so for me, actually, I think the city's made, and the law schools, whether it's BPP, School of Law, have all made great sort of strides in terms of focusing much more on skills during the LPC in particular now, and the training contracts, and law firms themselves, teach a lot of skills to people. And I think that, to me, that's where the fun of law is, right? There's not much fun actually in black letter law in reality. Some people will disagree, particularly if you're a tax lawyer. But, for me, the skill is all about the implementation of the law and dealing with the people and finding an outcome that, for somebody's business or objective, rather than actually giving them the legal answer they're looking for.
If I was to put you in charge, let's say you're in charge of the Board of Education, you're sitting on top of it, what would you sort of change, and what could be done to make people at a younger level interested in law?
I think law will change eventually when it's a generational thing. So I think, when I watch, if I think of all the old programs that you see on TV about lawyers, Cavanagh QC or whatever, there's a certain person that portrays lawyers in those types of programs, and I think we're sort of getting a bit more. I'm saying everyone's Harvey Specter. We'd all like to be, probably, but we're getting much more towards a different perception of lawyers that's even being sort of portrayed through TV films and whatever. And I think it's generational. I think in another 10 or 15 years time, when, that older generation who've all come from a particular background have all sort of retired and left from law, I think gradually there will be a shift in law over time. And I think we'll see a much more balanced and diverse, and when I say diverse, reflecting society more, because I think law doesn't necessarily, the participants in law doesn't reflect society. It's a bit too much them and us still, and I think over time that balance will change.
You mentioned obviously societal changes as now as 20 years ago. What are some similarities and differences you see people going through their training contracts today as you were?
I think technology. Definitely. I mean, when I was reminiscing with somebody a few weeks ago about when I was a trainee. So when I was in New York, for instance, and that was in 1999, I was in Alan Overy's New York office. There was probably 50 lawyers in that office at that time. There was only one computer in that office, which was in the library, where you could access the internet. And it was one of these dial-up modems, which I'm sure you're too young to even remember. But for me then, that was the only way you could actually access the internet, was some dial-up modem you had to plug into your phone socket in your home. And although we had sort of email then, we didn't have, for instance, PDF. So I remember one of the first jobs I did when I was a banking trainee at Alan Overy, I had to distribute a loan agreement, which is 250 pages, to 18 banks. And I had to sit in the office on a Friday night and print out 18 separate copies of this document, put it in an envelope, give it to a courier who would then deliver it to the relevant banker's home either that evening or the next day. Whereas obviously now that's one document, press of a button, goes to 18 people in an instant. So I missed an evening out with my friends doing that, whereas now it would take you 5 minutes and you wouldn't miss anything. So I think the advances in technology are incredible and obviously continue. I think AI is going to play a huge part going forward, not necessarily for the better in all circumstances, but I think lawyers will just keep becoming more efficient at doing certain things. And I think the more that we can remove menial tasks, I think, from lawyers and focus much more on the people and the outcome, I think that will only help the industry become more efficient and deliver a better output.
Do you think if social media was around, obviously when you were training, you would have been quite active on it, speaking about your career?
Well, social media it depends what we mean by social media, because obviously we have sort of LinkedIn, which we all use. I use a lot in terms of a means of communication, whether it's writing articles or posting about the firm, deal successes of the team, those sorts of things, versus kind of Facebook and Instagram. And I think, it can be quite hard to separate the personal and the professional. I mean, I'm not a huge user of Facebook or Instagram. I was back in the day, but I think I've just sort of grown out of that now. I'm not really into sort of taking selfies of everywhere I go and posting them. I've got better things to do, but I clearly there's a generation where that sort of thing, and including my kids, where that sort of thing is quite important. But I think the legal profession clearly has had to embrace the technology that people use, and that includes social media as a means of communication. When I was sort of a new partner in 2006, we used to do our sort of printed credentials and take those around with us and sort of give them out. And that used to be the primary means by which we sort of communicated our capability and success. Whereas obviously now things are much more instant than that. And I think law firms still have a way to go in terms of using spoken media, visual media. And I see at Mayer Brown, I think, are very good and very forward thinking in terms of encouraging people to do that. But not all lawyers have the confidence, because again, that's a whole new skill set that lawyers just aren't prepared for, particularly, older lawyers. So, it's about making that sort of part and parcel of people's jobs and being able to integrate that into your career, and knowing that, you have to build a brand of yourself as well as the law firm. And obviously your brand has to access where people are accessing information. And I think as lawyers get older, we try and teach them the fact that, you've got to build a self brand of you, an image of you as a lawyer that clients kind of want to buy into, as well as obviously the image of the firm.
I mean, as we were saying, social media, it's a massive part, builds up people's image, and essentially you leave a digital footprint. So if you post something on there, it's essentially there forever. But in terms of what law firms can do to aid maybe the older lawyers or kind of the younger trainees, is there anything that they can sort of introduce to help people build a social media profile as a lawyer?
Well, I think people do receive training. I think firms need to probably be better at doing that and giving more training. And I think also recognizing that it isn't just about, what you post on LinkedIn and how you go about doing that. It's much more than that now, whether it's article writing, interviewing, doing podcasts like this and others. I myself have been on Sky News, as we were talking about before this started. And obviously I received some media training before doing that, which was incredibly helpful. And so I think it's about building people's skill sets, and also I think anticipation about what their future career holds. And as you move through stages of your career, what you're going to have to do to kind of continue to progress. And I think people just will need to become more confident and more capable of accessing media and being, doing that in a way that portrays them and the firm in the right way.
I mean, obviously, as you said, you've kind of been active on Sky News. You've been on, podcasts and interviews before. All of those skills you have now have clearly played into your advantage back when you were a young lawyer, as you made partner seemingly in 6 years. I mean, talk to me about that rise, especially for someone who's transitioned in their career. And, that's an incredible feat in itself for a lawyer that's taken the traditional route. So how did, someone like yourself transitioning career, rise so quickly to become partner?
So I think clearly my fact I was older played into that a little bit. So I was clearly beyond my PQE in terms of maturity and confidence. And I think I'd managed to develop. I went on to comment as a fifth year lawyer and managed to develop my own business from doing that. I went to RBS in London in Bishopsgate at that time, and developed some great relationships, and people started giving me directly work, when I came back to the firm I was at, which was McGrigor's at the time, Scottish firm who are now part of Pinson's. And, I developed my own business case. And I think that whenever I speak to younger lawyers and we talk about sort of transitioning from, associate to partner, part of it, I think, is being perceived by the client as already being a partner, even though you're not a partner by name. And I think I managed to achieve that at that time and at that level quite quickly because of my age. I think that obviously helped, but also because people were confident enough to kind of give me work. And so, I mean, I'm sure in this day and age, people making partner at 6 years, certainly in bigger firms, it's become much more challenging, and it's probably more of a, 8 to 10 year, process now. So I think that was definitely one of the big achievements in my career, was obviously making partner at that young level of PQE.
Are there any outside lifestyle changes that you've made out of work that can attribute to obviously your success and to help you become a better lawyer in the workspace?
I think lifestyle is an interesting thing. And I think when you're a younger lawyer, you can burn the candle at both ends. When you get to my age, you can't. That's the reality of the situation. And I think as a younger lawyer, particularly when I was a partner at S.J. Berwin between 2007 and 10, and I was really sort of building my contact base and marketing hard. And I was definitely spending too much time, socializing in the evenings with clients at that point and not necessarily living a healthy lifestyle. And, that kind of made me ill, I'll be honest. And that wasn't great. And I think when I moved to Home Levels in 2010, although I carried on developing hard, and I was probably doing more business development than most people, I did it in a much better way than just going out and drinking with clients in the evening, whether it was breakfast, lunches, playing golf, going to rugby, football, whatever, and I think I started to sort of recognize the limitations on my body. You can't, work all the hours and socialize all the hours. Eventually catches up with you. Now, I think we're actually post financial crisis. Actually, I think the world changed. The attitude to all of that changed quite a bit, and also I think the development of sort of anti-bribery legislation made the social side a bit more difficult. And in a way, I think that was quite good, because for me personally, because I couldn't have carried on, burning the candle at both ends, as it were. And I think now the things that we used to do back then with bankers, you would never do, and bankers would never do now, in terms of the types of events that you would do. And so I think the world's calmed down quite a bit. And in a way, actually, that one of the good changes that's brought about is it's made the field a bit more open, because I think, female lawyers in particular, it became harder for them, I think, to develop relationships with particular industries, private equity, banking. because it was very male and boysy kind of orientated, whereas now it's hugely, not that at all. And I think that's actually made it easier for females in particular to develop their own relationships and have much stronger relationships with participants in those industries. And obviously there's more females that have come through in those industries as well. So I think all of that's been good for, the gender diversity in particular.
Are there any driving factors outside of work that keep the engine running, sort of keep you going in your career and, keep you grounded?
I mean, my kids, 100%. It's a huge responsibility. I still can't believe they're as grown up as they are now, and still going. And I think also just I've never really forgotten where I've come from in that sense. And, I try very hard to give back. I mean, my wife and I were interactive with the food bank, and we particularly, I think during COVID, actually, when we saw some TV programs, I remember Simon Ree's program on Cornwall really made us realise that we should be doing more to help people. I do some pro bono as well through Mayor Brown, who are really good at organising opportunities for those kind of things. So I recently represented somebody in a disability benefit appeals tribunal, which we won. Fantastic. And I think when you get had a wonderful email from this person who it just made you realise actually that's making a difference. In a real, really making a difference in somebody's lives. And I think sometimes we live in a bit of a bubble in the city, and it's a bit of a merry-go-round of money and transactions, and you sort of lose sight of the real world and the issues that people face. So I think that those sorts of things keep you grounded as well. But I still have a huge amount of friends. I try not to socialise with lawyers where I can, because we're all really boring and talk about work and law and everything else. So I try very hard to socialise with people, and in the countryside, and have friends, who don't earn huge amounts of money, do very different jobs than what I do. And I think that's important as well.
Being a lawyer itself is very demanding, it's challenging, it's something that's going to take up a lot of your time. But what advice can you give to more junior lawyers and other lawyers in general to just sort of turn off, just turn the lawyer brain off?
I mentioned technology earlier, and I think one of the downsides of technology is that turning off is impossible. I mean, I remember I was 6 years qualified when I got my first BlackBerry, and I thought, magic, I've got a BlackBerry. Yeah. The worst thing that could ever happen. Everything was downhill from then on, because in those days only partners really had them, and you think, oh God, they're in touch with their clients all the time. Isn't that great? And no, it's not actually. And so I think, look, technology has clearly made us 24/7 accessible, and that does have a real impact. I do calls, I work on holiday. It's very difficult. It's not what I would necessarily choose to do, and clearly, and I think law firms recognise that. Mayor Brown recently announced in London, for instance, that we couldn't disturb associates on their holiday, and clearly that's really important in terms of protecting people's mental health, giving them that break. And I think that's the real challenge, is finding that break from work. It becomes harder as a partner, if I'm honest, but because I think as an associate, it's a bit easier because you can sort of hand things over to people when you go away. But and I think that's always going to be the challenge, that finding that lifestyle balance of being able to turn off, and we all try and search for that perfect balance. I don't think we'll ever really find it, but if we can get somewhere close, then great.
I remember when I think it was an early teenager, and I got my first BlackBerry. So all I ever wanted, everyone in my school had them, and we had this brick slayer game. I just always used to play it, just like in school, always get my phone confiscated, and that's the only thing I dreamed of a BlackBerry. It wasn't even just for the phone to message people; it was just to play that one singular game. So a bit different, and maybe why how a lawyer would use it, but certainly it's just sort of.
I mean, look, I think people obviously just use their iPhones or whatever now, but the BlackBerry changed the legal profession, or the lawyers' lives and legal profession, even more than the internet and everything else. I think that was the moment actually where I think we lost control of our lives, when everyone started having BlackBerries.
Do you think iPhone's probably just taken it off to another level then?
Well, I mean, because I used to carry a BlackBerry, I used to carry a phone, then BlackBerries became phones, and which one do you use for calls and whatever. Whereas everything now is just in one place. And look, I think the technology has clearly made things more efficient. But, the first thing I do in the morning when I get up, other than read the sports pages, is look at my email. the last thing I probably do in the evening is look at my, so we are slaves to technology, whether we like it or not. I think that's an advantage and disadvantage, clearly on both sides. And it's trying to find a way of escaping from that as often as you can. And it's difficult. It drives my wife absolutely nuts and my kids. But of course now my kids, as they're grown older, are now become slaves themselves. So, I don't know what the answer is, but we all have to find a way of getting away from technology, for certain periods of time because I think it's changed human beings and as well as changing lawyers.
I've read somewhere, I think there's a suggestion that you should put your phone in a box with a timer on, and then you can't, get access to it for, let's say, half an hour, an hour. But I feel like that's probably career suicide in your industry.
Well, the worst thing is, and you have this paranoia that, okay, I'm going to put my phone down for a couple of hours, and we've all done it. But then you just get this sense of dread when you go back to your phone because you think, oh my God, what am I going to find? What's happened? If I miss something, you sort of get this FOMO type, fear. And I think that's just sad. I mean, that's exactly how it's become. We all just can't avoid looking at our phone constantly. And, it, as I say, drives my wife absolutely nuts, and rightly so, it should. I don't know what the answer is. We just live in that world where there's such an expectation of availability that clients have. And I think until that changes, we can't change as lawyers. We sort of, we're in a competitive world where we're always trying to meet the expectations and exceed them of clients.
I think we're just doomed. I think we're just waiting for the robots to take over.
We are.
But coming back to your career, obviously progressing, you made partner relatively quickly within 6 years of qualifying. Talk to me that sort of shift in mentality of as you're starting to become more of a senior associate and on the cusp of partnership.
So I think there are there are two types of partner in basic reality. There are those people call them rainmakers, whatever you want to say. There are people who their primary sort of function or their success is all about generating business. And then there are those partners who, are just exceptional lawyers who can deliver and give great legal advice. And the challenge for everyone is to move from one to the other, because I think when you become a junior partner, the expectation very much is, you're there to kind of provide the exceptional legal advice and deliver that product and look after the client kind of day to day. But to progress, you've got to shift from one to the other. And I think that's a huge challenge, because what you're asking somebody to do is actually not be a lawyer and become a entrepreneur, a businessman, a salesman. And I think that I think law tends to kind of thin out as people move through their career. And the percentage of people who move from associate to senior associate, from associate to counsel to junior partner to equity partner, that's where the law people thin out and become fewer and fewer. And I think that's the skill set, and it's very hard to teach people that, because I think it can be quite personality driven. Mm-hmm. And I've always been quite a sort of open, easygoing. I can go and chat to anyone about anything, and that obviously helps in terms of breaking down barriers and developing relationships with people. But for other people, that's quite a challenge. And these can be the most intelligent, sort of academic people we could ever wish to meet, but in order for them to kind of win work, they've got to be maybe something that they're not personally. And I've seen people really struggle with that, during my career, very capable partners who, have a fear of meeting people, who don't like talking about themselves, can't initiate a conversation, find it very hard to become quite personal, which, you have to be to develop, a deep relationship with somebody. And they find that very challenging. And it's hard to teach that because it is personality driven. So, I don't know what the answer to that would be, but I think for me, I made that transition, I think quite naturally, but I draw back again on my experience, as a health inspector, and being used to being in that personal situation with people and being on the spot and dealing with, not necessarily a pressure situation, because you don't get much pressure in local government, but just dealing with people. And I think that skill set is really important for people to develop. So I would encourage people not to go straight into university. I would say go traveling, go on your own, sort of expand yourself personally and develop some different skills, even do another job for a year or so before you go to university. Because I think developing those skills, you may not see the benefit of those in the early years of practice, but when you get more senior, you actually do.
Is there anything a junior lawyer can do from day one to immediately, put them on the right path to become a partner?
Do you know, people often ask that question, and I think the reality is your career does go in stages, and you can't sort of jump a stage. So when I was a junior lawyer, for me, it was all about doing as much work as I possibly could, getting all the experience, learning, trying to take on responsibility and push myself in terms of sort of knowledge and responsibility on deals. And I think that never really kind of changed even when I moved through. I was always trying to sort of do the work above where I was at and push myself. But you can't sort of jump from being a first year associate to doing the job of a fifth year. You know, you've got to put in those hard yards of, you know, probably doing the boring end of the deal, but doing it really well and convincing people that, you know, you've nailed how to do conditions precedent and all these things and organize signings, because then people will give you more responsibility and you kind of move on. And then, you know, you start doing more interesting things, but then you think, okay, I'm, you know, drafting this document, but what does it all really mean? And so you start listening to negotiations and participating. And so there's no escaping the fact you have to develop and gain experience and knowledge. But I think that, you know, associates shouldn't be afraid of that. And some associates I speak to, they're like, oh my God, you know so much. I'm never going to know all of that. I'm like, you know, guys, 23 years, right? It's, you know, I knew nothing when I was at your level, believe me, but you just have to go through that and there's no escaping it. But it's always about asking questions, listening to people, trying to listen to what clients have to say, because I think you learn more from clients than you ever do from lawyers. I certainly have. During my career, progressed because of the clients I work with and listening to them and learning from them. But yeah, there's no law is not a sort of shortcut career. It is a long slog at the end of the day, but it's a challenging and rewarding one at the end of it. And I think that's why people tend to stay in.
I mean, obviously you reach partner within 6 years and now you're, you know, ahead of a practice. So talk to me in the difference of becoming a partner and then being a partner, but becoming the head of a practice. What sort of changes in work and attitude did you experience whilst achieving that?
Well, I think when you first become partner, it's like the next stage of your career. So you're very much focused on your career. And obviously, you know, you work probably within a team of other partners and have people that you're supervising or whatever, but it is very much about, and the focus is very much about developing you as a partner. Whereas I think when you get older in your career, when you start leading a practice, it's not just about you. And in fact, actually, it's very little about you, it's about others. And so I think for me, I feel great now when I see people who used to be trainees of mine or associates of mine become partner. And I think that's one of the great feelings of becoming a sort of older, slightly more grey-haired practitioner, is seeing other people develop and come through, and people you remember. You know, Paul Tenenbaum, good example, somebody who was with me as a trainee at S.J. Berwin, May partner at Mayer Brown. It's just a great feeling to see those kind of people come through and see success in their career. So I think when you get to that sort of more practice level responsibility, it is more about others than it is about yourself.
How important is your role, you know, being a partner, as well as, you know, how important is it to be a leader too? Yeah,
leadership's an interesting conundrum for lawyers, because I think lawyers aren't necessarily natural leaders. Mm-hmm. You know, we're there to give advice to people at the end of the day. That's the essence of what we do. And so, I think it becomes down to sort of personality, and everyone has their own style of leadership. My style wouldn't necessarily be everyone's. I'm quite forthright and direct, maybe too much sometimes. Others have a much more softer approach, which, you know, for people like me, probably don't actually realize what they're saying when they're trying to say it. But I think the important thing about leadership is trying to create an environment where everybody is welcome and everybody's involved and everyone feels they can be successful, regardless of their ability and their own personalities. And I think self-awareness becomes quite a big element of that. And during my career, I've done some self-awareness training, which has been incredibly interesting, not least learning about yourself and your impact on others. And I think that's incredibly an important thing to understand, particularly the more senior you get, because I think we all sort of want to be accepted as we are, but obviously as we are does have an impact on others who are not like us in particular. And, you know, I think I've, you know, through my career learned sometimes in the hard way that, you know, you need to adapt your style for different people and make people feel they're included. And I think inclusion clearly is a big focus for law firms. But I think from a leadership perspective as well, that's really important to carry the team with you at all times and not make people feel they're being left behind. Certainly from a team perspective, there's people who are always different in terms of capability and may not progress as quickly as others, but you've really got to grab everyone and take them with you.
Being a partner and obviously the leader of a practice, there's an element, obviously, you need to be a figurehead, but at the same time, you need to create a culture that people will enjoy. So how do you create a culture that speaks for itself within your team?
I think it can be I found it challenging at times, being honest, not because I've not wanted people to feel that way, but sometimes, particularly in leveraged finance, it's very intense. Deals happen very quickly. It can be very stressful, and trying to kind of deal with doing the deal as well as sort of dealing with people sometimes can there's a kind of clash between the two of those, because I'm very driven at delivering success for the client, and therefore that is always, rightly or wrongly, and people have different views on this, that's always prominent in my mind. And sometimes that can mean being a bit harsh with people in the team, because that's what we're trying to deliver, and we have to deliver that. If we don't deliver that, we don't get the next job. The client's not happy. And I think that's a real challenge in some practice areas in law, leveraged finance, in private equity, M&A can be very much like that. But that doesn't mean that we don't reflect afterwards and think, I could have done better there. And I think as we go on, we're never the finished product with lawyers. I don't ever think I am. I've still got a lot to learn. I think particularly dealing with people and trying to, work out that balance of client versus people and deal versus lifestyle. We'll have a lot to learn on that front. And can I do better? Of course. But that's the price of success, I think, in terms of having those kind of issues to deal with.
I read somewhere, I think in an interview you did quite a few years ago, you had a crazy golfing adventure where you had lots of rounds and you couldn't walk after. So sort of talk to me about that experience and how that came to fruition.
So I mentioned earlier I did this comment at RBS back in 2005, and this guy there called Neil Rudge, who actually I still play golf with now. We're actually randomly members of the same golf club. He was head of I think it was leveraged finance at RBS at the time, the mid-market team, and so we always looked at ways of sort of doing some BD together and spending time together. And he had this crazy idea of raising money for a charity by doing a marathon of golf, and we actually did it at Henley Golf Club. And he'd worked out, I forget now, I think it was 5.5 rounds of golf would basically mean we walked the same distance as a marathon, as if we run a marathon. Wow. And we teed off almost sort of first light at 4:30 a.m. It was obviously in the middle of summer, and just off we went playing golf. And these days 1 round of golf is almost too much for me walking around, but 5.5 rounds of golf back to back without having a break. I remember we'd finished and I'd gone home, and my wife had run a bath for me, and I got in the bath and I actually couldn't get out. And I was actually, we were laughing about it afterwards. Maybe we need one of those sort of lifts, that sort of take people out of baths. And my legs had just completely seized up. My back had seized up. And I just woke the next day in the most horrific pain, the stiffness. But it raised, I think it was for an air ambulance charity, I seem to recall. It raised a lot of money. But yeah, it still gets the odd mention now and again. So you obviously did your research very well, because I forget when that was. I think that was probably in late sort of maybe 2008, 9, something like that. But yeah, it was never again. I can honestly say never again.
I mean, at least you broke your body for a good cause. It wasn't for nothing then.
Well, I think it made me realise that I definitely never run a marathon. I'm not built for that, unfortunately. I've got plenty of friends who do that and more, but yeah, and I mean, I couldn't even bend down to pick the golf ball up. I was just leaving the golf balls in the hole or wherever they were at the time. It's just getting a new one out of my bag, because I couldn't even bend down at the end. But yeah, it was a good cause, and it was good fun at the time. But I think now I'd find some maybe more genteel ways of raising money for charity.
Do you think maybe we could introduce some crazy golfing marathons to Mayor Brown's leveraged finance team, just sort of put them through a hell week, so to speak?
Well, I think I'm the only one who plays golf in the team, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we do. We have one of the other partners who occasionally does leverage finance. He's sort of part of the team, but does the things he plays as well. He's actually very good. But yeah, I'm always trying to recruit volunteers from around the other teams if I do something with clients, because I have a number of clients who play golf, and obviously it's nice, doing things sort of 3 or 4 of you together. So yeah, but you may get some take up, but from the younger partners, not or younger people, not the older ones.
That's quite interesting, because golfing itself is seen as quite a business sport. Obviously, a lot of people kind of talk business over golf, but is there anything beyond golf? I mean, do you think sort of lawyers should take up, not necessarily be an expert golfer or have a sport they're interested in, but they should at least sort of take something else up as an avenue to meet clients?
So I think obviously do something you enjoy. I mean, clearly, if you're going to hate golf, it's a long time to spend out just doing one round.
Yeah.
And I've seen female clients who have taken up golf, female associates who've taken up golf to try and be more included. But I think these days, people try and find events that are more inclusive, because clearly there are more. There's more diversity within clients as well as there is within law firms, and so you don't tend to find these sort of big drunken nights out that you used to have that were very Boise back in the day, which is a great thing. And so I had a couple of the female associates in my team did an afternoon tea recently with some female clients, which I thought was a great thing to do. And so people, we do tend to have sort of more female focused events with clients, but also we do things like very civilized wine tastings or dinners or food evenings or whatever, cookery things that it's just much more inclusive, and I think there's and I think clients respond to that much more than if you just say, hey, let's go to the rugby, and we'd still do those kind of events, but they're not that's not the primary means by which we try and develop relationships with people. We try and find ways of. And also, when you develop a relationship with the client, you kind of get a feel for what they enjoy, because clearly you want to do something they really want to come to, particularly if they're giving up their free time. And so developing that personal relationship and finding out what their interests are is a good way then of being able to engage with them.
Do you take the team to the football often, or are people sort of, is that quite a big thing in
well, I'm a Chelsea fan, so there isn't really much point taking anyone to Chelsea at the moment.
We have to move on quickly from that topic.
Exactly. But sometimes a particular client who supports a particular team or wants to go to a particular game, then you will do that. But I much prefer trying to do things with a wider bunch of people. I think team on team is much more a much better way of developing relationships than sort of one-on-one. I mean, clearly we do one-on-one lunches and breakfasts and those sorts of things, but we try very much to focus much more on there being much more people from us and them together developing a relationship, because you want to develop relationships right across the client, not just in the most senior people. And so I think it's trying to find bigger events. Crazy golf is actually quite good. You don't need to be good at golf to be able to do that. It doesn't involve lots of walking, and you tend to be able to do it indoors as well, which can help.
Humiliation though.
Exactly. We've even done things like darts. There's all these table tennis, all these things popping up around the city, even sort of what they call it, clay shooting on indoor. All of these things kind of pop up now where you can do different events with clients. But it's nice, particularly in the summertime, it's nice to try and find things to do outdoors. People enjoy being just outside and away from the office. So, we try and do those kind of things as well with clients.
Do you have that mindset where, I guess in football they say off the pitch, on the pitch, but out of work, if you develop those relationships, with your lawyers in the team, that would translate to, working more cohesively in a working environment?
Oh, completely. And I think it's not just about winning the next deal when you're developing relationships with clients. It is about that team thing. And I think when people understand themselves, individually better, but also I think just breaking down barriers leads to better communication, more honest communication between people. And I think people are more inclined to just pick up the phone, ask a question, deal with something that maybe when it's at the start of a relationship, things are a bit more formal. You don't quite have that same rapport that you have when you have that relationship, and that's absolutely key. I think to have a good long-term relationship with the client is having just that team and that openness, and people just feeling relaxed around each other much more. Both from the lawyer side, asking clients questions, and vice versa.
You've done, obviously, going back to your career, you've done obviously over 200 deals in the leveraged finance market.
Those are just the ones that are completed.
Yeah.
There's plenty more that haven't.
I'm sure you might not remember them all, but is there anyone that really stands out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you always remember your first deal as a partner that you
Mhm.
get instructed on and you close. And I remember that. I can't talk specifically
Of
about it, but
course.
you always remember that sense of pride of somebody picking up the phone to you and saying, "We want you to do this deal for us," and you you deliver it, and thankfully it went well, and you sort of get the thanks and the praise afterwards. And so I think you remember that. And I think also, worked at a number of firms and getting the first deal, at your firm when you join is obviously a great feeling as well. So I think, for me now, I take great pride in the service that we deliver. I push people very hard to deliver a very good service to the clients, and the clients very much appreciate that. And the feedback that I've always had through these sort of external reviews, Chambers and Legal 500 is focused not just on what I know, but on the delivery aspect of that. And I think that's really important as we're in a competitive industry and we are a service industry at the end of the day. So I think you remember the feedback. I still remember things that haven't gone well because none of us do things perfectly, and I've always tried to learn hard from those. And I think one of the key things as a lawyer, lawyers find it very hard to listen to feedback or actually to solicit feedback. And and then when we do, we always try and disagree with it or argue against it, which is the worst thing you can ever do with feedback. And I think one of the things that lawyers need to be able to do during their career is just listen. And the client, when they give you feedback is never wrong. That is the feedback, and whether you like it or not, and whether you agree with it or not, that's what the client thought, and that affects your ability to win more work or do more deals or expand that relationship. And so, client feedback to me is the key of developing long-term relationships with people. And I've always gone after clients and said, okay, give it to me between the eyes. How did we do? Good and bad. Because I think, and actually clients really react positively to that, even where they have negative feedback. The fact you've wanted it and you've listened to it, I think, that takes a relationship forward. Whereas if you don't ask for it, you don't listen to it, that client will have a view that you can never change because you've done nothing to learn what they thought and what you can do to change that. And I think that's really key. And I think lawyers are afraid of feedback, whether it's appraisal time, we have, or whatever. You just, that's one of the keys of moving things forward, I think.
How do you come back from a major blunder, or if a deal's going on, you've done something that, is a bit wrong? How can someone bounce back from that?
Well, you have to be honest about it. I don't think you can hide. I've seen people do that, and it never works. I think you have to be honest. And I think clients respect honesty always, I think, in that sense. And I think you have to find solutions depending on what it is to get around that. And then you have to really sort of try and rebuild trust and confidence, through doing other things. Hopefully it's one small thing in terms of everything that you're doing, that it doesn't have a major impact, but we have to deal with these things from time to time. Yeah, we have insurance for a reason, unfortunately. But thankfully, touch wood, there's not been too many instances of those in my career, and hopefully there won't be going forward. But you just have to face up to them and deal with them with the client. And I think by doing that, you maintain a good chance of keeping the relationship.
You're now a lawyer, obviously, with the 200 plus deals, the ones you've completed, with lots, 23 years experience. If your past self was, faced in front of you now, back when you were a public health inspector, do you think are some of the things that past you would say to future you?
Look after yourself better. I definitely didn't look after myself enough in my younger partner days. I think also, maybe try and take a different approach at certain times in my career than I did. I mean, we all learn by experience. School of hard knocks is definitely one that we all unfortunately go through. And I think, I definitely would have dealt with certain things differently during my career if I'd known now or knew then what I know now. But that's unfortunately just part of life and part of growing up, whether it's as an individual and as a lawyer. And I keep trying to pass on my wisdom to my kids, which obviously all dads do, and the kids utterly detest it and swear they're never going to be like you, as I swore I never was going to be like my dad, but ended up being. So yeah, I think you just can't substitute experience and the learning process of life. Unfortunately, it'd be great if we could. We all try and learn from others and others' wisdom, but I think, and I'm one of those people who just likes to learn from their own mistakes rather than other people's, unfortunately. And that's the way I'm just built and am. But yeah, I think people could listen a bit more, we'd all maybe make fewer mistakes.
One final question for me before we sort of head on to the next segment quickly, but if you could give me a few hot takes for your market predictions for this year, what do you see? Obviously, I've put you on the spot a bit, but what can you sort of see emerging for the market this year?
I mean, I think and I've spoken about this sort of previously this year, we're definitely seeing more distress and the businesses that are struggling. and certainly when I look at my workload at the moment, it's more heavily slanted towards dealing with those types of situations than it is dealing with doing new deals, although we still thankfully have some of those to do. And I think that is where actually experience and expertise really help businesses. That's when they really lean on those lawyers who've been around for a while and take advice on how to deal with particular situations. And I'm sort of finding that people are coming to me and we're dealing with those kind of things. I think the economy is going to remain challenging. I think we're only really at the start of businesses transitioning into the new world. I think, in my field, I talk about businesses having too much debt, and they do. They have too much debt for the performance of the business, the EBITDA, as we call it, their sort of profits, compared to what they had pre-COVID, where maybe they were making much more money and able to deal with the amount of debt they had. Now they have too much debt. And I think there's going to be a period in the market over the next 2 years or so where people have to resolve those issues, and they're not going to be easy to resolve. And, people are going to, often results in people taking losses somewhere, right? So there's going to be that to kind of deal with. Clearly, people borrowing new money is becoming challenging because it's much more expensive. They probably don't want to borrow as much. That makes doing deals harder in my part of the world because people like to borrow lots of money to buy businesses. So I think we're in a challenging kind of transitional period. But as always, as we saw in the financial crisis, everyone thought it was doom and gloom. The banks aren't lending any money anymore. That's it. Leveraged finance is finished. Along come all the funds, zillions of money. Leveraged finance goes through, the biggest boom years, certainly in my career. So the market always evolves, and we're starting to see evolution in the markets of different types of lenders coming through, people filling gaps in sort of capital structures, being able to put money in where there's a gap that's been created by what's going on. So the market always evolves, and I have every confidence in leveraged finance. It will continue to evolve, and people will just find a way of doing deals and making that work.
I want to introduce everyone to our brand new segment. We've had this previously on our podcast Beyond the Suit called Click to Agree. This is essentially a rundown of a few statements that I'm going to read to Stuart, and he is going to essentially agree or disagree to them. He can obviously feel free to elaborate to them if he has any further comments, but essentially this is just fun and lighthearted, and let's get on with the questions. So the first statement I had for you is that NQs and new lawyers at Mayer Brown should perform an initiation song.
We've often joked about this. Agree.
Do you think what sort of would your initiation song would have been back in the day?
So I used to karaoke, and for whatever reason, Rhinestone Cowboy, Glenn Campbell used to be my karaoke song. I don't know why. Maybe it was the only thing I could sing, anywhere near in tune, which I can't sing at all in tune. But yeah, I think that would be fun.
Do you think there's a few people with maybe a hidden golden voice in the firm?
I've got no doubt. There was actually a guy I used to work with who had the most amazing voice that nobody knew about until we did karaoke with clients one night, and we were all like, "Wow, this guy should be on Pop Idol." So I'm sure there's definitely some talent out there.
All right, next one: AI will eventually replace lawyers.
Disagree.
You think we're seeing like a lot of things like ChatGPT, obviously it's kind of being sometimes used in the courts and things like that. Do you still see that lawyers can eventually sort of coexist with AI, or how do you see it playing out?
I think so. There's obviously the process and there's the person, right? I think in law, I think the process side, AI's got a huge role to play in terms of process. I don't think AI will be giving legal advice. I think people still want to deal with people, certainly in my area anyway.
NQ salaries will double in the next 10 years.
Disagree.
There seemed to be a bit of a salary war kind of last year, but do you think that's going to stagnate for a while, or do you think it's just going to obviously eventually pick back up?
Well, I think for me, I look at it from the client side, and the more salaries go up, the more hourly rates go up, the more clients have to pay. There's just no appetite in the market on the client side to keep paying more and more hourly rates. So I think that's now clearly as efficiency comes in and people are able to kind of cover more work in, a working day, then yeah, okay, you can maybe justify paying people more. But I think, right now, I think we occasionally go through these kind of spikes every now and again, but I don't think they'll double in the next 10 years.
Smart casual should replace suits.
Oh, that's a really tough one, because I've occasionally been seen in the office in ripped jeans, and trainers on days when I have meetings. I think it's a balance. I think when we're on sort of non-client days, what I wouldn't expect people to wear suits in the office, but by the same token, I think there's a certain respect and formality that goes with kind of wearing a suit and going to a meeting in a suit with a client, and that's probably what the client expects. Although, again, clients tend to drive these things. We're seeing less and less clients wear suits as well now.
So do you think if they're not wearing as many suits, is there still like a necessity to obviously, because you're still representing the firm, or would you try one smart casual? I
think so. I mean, look, I've gone to breakfast and, with clients wearing, what I'm wearing now, because I know that's what they're going to be wearing. But would I go to sort of a formal meeting? I wouldn't know, because I think people just have that perception of you, as you say, you're representing them. You're representing them, sort of opposite other people. And so I think they just have everyone clicks into their stereotype lawyer mode, I think, at that point, and that's how they expect lawyers to be.
Trainees should take a social media seat.
I'm going to sort of go halfway between the two. I think they need social media training, but they need other skills training, not just social media.
Definitely. This is quite an interesting one. Law should be introduced at a more junior school level.
Maybe respect for the law should be introduced. Disagree.
I think obviously it would be nice, obviously, for me when I was at school. The topic of law only got introduced as I was, kind of heading into uni, latter stages of sixth form. It would have been nice if I had that option just to even get introduced to the legal sector at secondary school level. But then again, I don't think my 13-year-old brain, let alone my brain now, could probably handle the details of it.
I mean, I agree. I think at that age, I just wanted to play sport. And if anyone said to me, let me teach you about law, I think I would have switched off immediately.
I know. I think that's the problem with introducing at a younger level. But then, as you were kind of mentioning, when you were younger and options, different sort of classes, not being able to be introduced, I feel like the mention of it, or it should be sort of like a side thing you could potentially take at school. Or I'm sure you're quite active with the vacation schemes and things like that. More, getting involved with speaking to students.
Yeah, and I think, as I said earlier, I think it's more important for people to develop skills at that age rather than, specific legal knowledge, because I think you can teach legal knowledge at any point. You can't necessarily teach the skills.
Being dual qualified is a benefit for your career.
Disagree now. I think I work in a big international firm. We have lots of US lawyers, so my New York qualification isn't kind of relevant day to day.
Do you think, obviously, because you mentioned that you became New York qualified before England and Wales, did you still, obviously, that must hold a necessity to some degree?
I think in those days, again, when I qualified in 2000, when I think about when I was training at Allen Overy was only just becoming a sort of international firm at that point, particularly, in Europe. It seemed almost every month there'd be a new office opening and new people coming on board. So I think you have to look back at where law firms were then. And I saw very much the sort of growth in transatlantic deals, which actually, did happen in the 2000s. And so my view was having an understanding of both sets of law would be very useful for that. And that has proved to be the case over the years. I still do deals that involve the US now, and obviously understanding the sort of US bits of my deals is very useful, but I think I understand that through doing those deals rather than sort of studying for the bar exam.
And a last one from me is that all public health inspectors would make great lawyers.
Definitely not. Definitely not. Some of them are way too officious. Definitely not.
You think one out of you're kind of the select few. Obviously, you just need the certain qualities to be able to transition.
Exactly.
well, perfect. Appreciate you for that segment. Just sort of moving on to our final question, and that's one that sticks with every single podcast. We'd like to make a statement of it and kind of leave a lasting effect for those watching. Obviously, I'm sure you're familiar with the show Suits. You've got Harvey Specter and Mike Ross, who are the main protagonists. Throughout the series, Harvey's always questioning Mike, and one specific question that sticks out to me, he asked Mike, what would you do if a gun was pointed at your head, and obviously that kind of insinuates that you need to think of other options on the spot. But moving on to the question, is there any time in your career where you felt like you've had a gun to your head, and how did you sort of get out of that situation?
I think metaphorically, yes, absolutely. Whether it's sort of discussion over fees with clients, I think you just have to in that situation keep calm, argue your piece, and hope that the other person sees reason and doesn't pull the trigger.
Yeah.
I think that's all you can do in that scenario. I think don't panic, definitely, and just if you believe in yourself, I think you can articulate and reason your way out of that kind of situation. Not always. People can be stubborn, but I think that's the only way you will get out of it with a resolution that you want. Sometimes you just have to say, okay, and that's kind of the reality of our job. Sometimes we get put in a position we have no option. We have to suck it up, and we don't like being in that position. We try all we can to avoid it, but it does happen occasionally.
A great answer to obviously a great ending to the podcast. I really want to thank you for your time, obviously, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on this podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. Before we wrap up, do you have anything that you want to shout out? And where can people sort of find you and get in contact with you? Well,
look, I think people shouldn't fill laws for somebody else. I think that's my view. Not everyone has to work in the city and do those kind of hours. My wife's a great inspiration. She's actually working in a small law firm outside London at the moment and studying to do the LPC part-time. Although she's not she's 40 years old and wanting to make a career for herself, being originally a foreign lawyer. So law is for everyone. People should have aspirations to be a lawyer. They shouldn't be afraid of it. Yes, it's hard work and is a tough academic topic to study, but they shouldn't be afraid of that and not think that because they come from a particular background or don't have any money or whatever, that law is not for them. Law is for everyone. And I think the more people who believe that and show that, then I think in the long term, the better the legal profession will be.
Is there anywhere where people can sort of get in contact with
Absolutely. You? Look, people can join up with me on LinkedIn and drop me a message. They can drop me a message at Mayor Brown direct. Always very happy to speak to people when I have time and if they want some kind of advice or career guidance. Unfortunately, I don't control the Mayor Brown vacation schemes or training contracts, so I'm not in a position to offer any of those. But I'm always very happy to give people 5 minutes of my time if that's going to be useful to them in any way.
Well, I want to thank everyone there, for those who are listening, watching, maybe both. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you would like to get in contact with me, if you are a lawyer looking for a new role or simply just want an appraisal of the market, do get in contact with me over LinkedIn, Zac Green. Green is in the colour, that is. And if you would like to reach me via email, it's zac.green@fintelligent.co.uk. Thank you again so much for listening. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Suit, brought to you by Fintelligent. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, like and leave a review. Every time you do, it helps others find the show. If you're interested in finding out more about Fintelligent and how we can assist you in taking the next step in your legal career or making your next exciting hire, head over to fintelligent.co.uk. Join us next time for more insightful conversations on Beyond the Suit podcast.